to the ARC Training Center for Medical Implants Technologies first webinar during this COVID-19 pandemic and at normal time for all of us. And welcome especially to my colleagues from ARC Summit. I am Jia-Yee. I am the co-manager for the center. I also wear a second hat, which is as a MedTech Enterprise Fellow at the Melbourne School of Engineering. So a special welcome to colleagues from Melbourne and especially Queensland and Sydney. It's a cold and crispy but sunny day here in Melbourne. We're going to spend the next 45 minutes for me to give you a high-level introductory course on regulation to do with medical devices. But before I begin, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land and pay my respects to the elders past, present, and emerging. So a bit about myself. I've been with the University of Melbourne now for close to 4 years, if not 5. I started my career as a virologist, so we live in interesting times. So as a virologist, I'm paying very close attention to developments related to this emerging virus, and there's lots still to be known about this virus. I was undertaking research that's funded by NHMRC for a good 10, 15 years, and then did an MBA in 2005 and joined the dark side after that. So went into technology startup, commercialization, joined Victorian Government Department of Health and Human Services, and the current strategy of the Victorian Government in Health and Life Sciences. I was the lead author to develop that strategy. That is a publicly available document. And it's been a pleasure working with Professor Peter Lee, who's the director of ARC Summit, and as well as Deputy Director, Associate Professor David Ackland, and my colleague Meg Belmonte, who formed the team within ARC Summit. So just to provide an overview, and before I do that, also a special welcome to colleagues from Queensland and Sydney, especially from the ARC Training Center for Innovative Bioengineering, led by Professor Hala Zekrat, and Professor Peter Pavonka and his team, based at ARC Training Center for Joint Biomechanics. That's the latest training center to be funded that we know of, associated and linked with the research that's at ARC Summit. We also welcome colleagues from University of Melbourne, both from ARC Training Center for Personalised Therapeutics Technologies, led by Professor Alistair Stewart here at Department of Pharmacology, and also ARC Training Center in Cognitive Computing for Medical Technologies, led by Professor Tim Baldwin at School of Computing and Information Systems at the University of Melbourne. So welcome to all, especially to the PhD students who have been enrolled at these respective training students. So really, this webinar is targeted to our students who undertake research with their respective industry partners. And also welcome to the postdocs that have been recruited. They are the early stage career researchers who have been also funded by the Australian Research Council. Just a little bit of background about ARC Summit. We were established formally in September last year, headed by Professor Peter Lee, and we bring together 23 organizations led by University of Melbourne. Some of our partners here have joined, so welcome to Eric Berg from 3D Meditech. So the 23 organizations, we represent academic institutions. Our PhD students are enrolled through University of Melbourne, Flinders University, Griffith University. We also have 12 commercial companies, both SMEs, local, as well as large manufacturers. Some of them based in the US, Belgium, UK. Who else have I missed? China. We bring together several leading hospitals with 9 surgeons, their specialty areas in oral maxillofacial, craniofacial, as well as orthopedic surgery. Now, underpinning the research projects to which PhD students and postdocs undertake in partnership with their industry partners, we run a foundation program, and that's led by Professor Nick Zetz from Epworth Healthcare. Nick is the Executive Director of R&D at Epworth Healthcare. And the foundation program aims to deliver talks and webinars such as this, a focus on ethics, regulatory affairs, and clinical trial management, giving our PhD students and postdoc a more rounded knowledge and expertise in addition to their technical expertise as biomedical engineers. At this point, I'd like to encourage you to mute as well, so that everyone can hear hear this talk. Now, I'm also going to provide an overview of the medical device classification as part of the structure of this webinar, and include and provide updates on where we are at with several countries undertaking regulatory reforms, delve a little bit into custom-made implants, personalized medical devices, because these are things that are relevant to the respective ARC training centers, provide a couple of case studies, one on the failure of regulation and another on a local company based in Melbourne, and hopefully we will have time for me to take some questions. So it's important that all the medical devices that are legally supplied into the market receive certification approval from the in-country regulatory authorities. In Australia, that's the Therapeutics Goods Administration. The US, it's the Food and Drug Administration. And the EU, it's the European Commission for Health and Food Safety. In China, they've recently changed the name from China FDA to the National Medical Products Administration. And it's important that with the range of regulatory reforms taking place, that the companies continue to update their go-to-market strategy and their regulatory strategy as part of a broader approach underpinning their commercialization strategy. So there are key legislative instruments, and it's really important that these regulators set high standards, and a lot of the definitions and requirements of medical device regulation is captured and dictated by these legislative instruments. So there are acts in each country. So in Australia, we have the Therapeutics Goods Act, FDA has the US has the Federal Food and Drug Cosmetic Act, and so on, including the EU. Now that's to set high standards to ensure that we have clinical safety and we ensure clinical effectiveness of these medical devices, making sure that the medical device manufacturers and their sponsors have high level of processes and procedures in place, and that allows the public some level of comfort that there's accountability, there's transparency and safety of products that are being sold into the marketplace. Now, it's important that we do have these tight regulations in place. And there has been criticisms of regulators and ongoing criticisms because some have seen regulators being very slow to act when there have been early reports or notifications of adverse events occurring with some of the medical devices that are in the market. These cause significant harm to patients, and they receive significant media coverage. And some of these include metal-on-metal hip replacements, breast implants, transvaginal mesh. So for example, in metal-on-metal hip replacements, some of the concerns and information filtering through was that these were wearing down, causing metal particles to be released into the bloodstream and soft tissues. And as a result, causing chronic inflammation, adverse events, purported potential risk of developing cancer. Similarly, there's been high-profile media coverage of problems with breast implants. There's eruptions causing pain, disfigurement, allergic reactions, and so on. We'll delve a little bit into this challenge with the transvaginal mesh that has received a lot of publicity. Now, this is posted on Drug Watch around 2019. Transvaginal mesh is used to treat women who suffer from pelvic organ prolapse and urinary incontinence caused by childbirth. But the challenge is that the manufacturers are facing lawsuits because these medical devices are causing complications such as pain, bleeding, infection, organ perforation, autoimmune disorders. These are terrible consequences of a device being implanted. And so far, 830 million have been settled across 20,000 cases, and there are ongoing lawsuits. As of July 2019, 6 large and well-established corporations, including Johnson & Johnson Ethicon, facing thousands of lawsuits. And as of 2019, FDA have stopped these manufacturers from selling this transvaginal medical mesh as medical devices. Now in Australia, similarly, women have been largely affected. This report from the ABC, really in 2019, already we have a Senate committee tabling their report of the findings, and these women form a second part of a class action against these manufacturers. And more recently, around March, media reported that Johnson & Johnson had to pay 2.6 million to 3 women impacted, and more than 1,000 women have successfully sued Johnson & Johnson. Ongoing cost cases continues till this date. So we will see ongoing media coverage on this issue. So what is a medical device? What is the role of the regulator? And how do they address and keep up with technology? Because some of these regulators, so there's lots of debates as the fact that the regulators haven't kept up with the times, haven't kept up with the technological advances, haven't kept up with advances in material sciences, and some of the regulatory approaches really needs modernizing, so to speak. Well, in Australia and as well in the EU and in the US, in other countries, they share similar definitions of medical device. This definition is in their in-country respective acts. So in Australia, the Therapeutic Goods Act defines medical device as any instrument, apparatus, appliance, materials to be used for human beings for the purpose of diagnosis, prevention, monitoring, treatment, or alleviation of a range of clinical conditions. So for any of the manufacturers or commercial companies legally supplying these devices, they must receive a certification or approval. For example, in Australia, from the TGA, for their device to be listed, they have to be classified and then listed on the Australian Register for Therapeutic Goods. Anyone, the public, can go online and search this ARTG database. So I went in and searched for queried face shield. So that's in the news, face shield, face mask, and so on, as a result of us being in COVID-19. And what pops up is that lots of information on face shields. Here are examples of companies that are supplying it, and what will come up is the ID number, the product name, and there are 2 categories, the sponsor and the manufacturer. So in the case of the face shield, The sponsor, it's the responsibility of the sponsor. They have to be an Australian legal entity. In this particular instance, it's Jingleway Proprietary Limited. That's the Australian company that submits an application to register submits an application to the TGA to register their device. The manufacturer in this instance is actually based in China. So the sponsor is responsible for ensuring that what they import or bring into the country is on this ARTG database. I've done another query on an implantable, this one with cochlear implants. And in this instance, Cochlear is both the sponsor as well as the manufacturer. So how are medical devices actually classified? Well, it's based on the risk profile. And as you will see, classification is also stated in the Therapeutics Goods Act. Classification goes from class 1 to class 3, the lowest risk to the highest risk, and regulators applies a risk-based approach. And the risk-based approach takes into account the potential harm a medical device can cause. Is it in the amount of energy source that's used, if any, where the device is actually implanted or worn on the body, how long how long is the device being worn or implanted in the body. So these are clear considerations for the classification of that medical device. It's important to ensure that the patient is kept safe, the device is produced in high quality. And more recently, there has been a demand for medical device companies to show clinical effectiveness of their device. So the lowest risk is really class 1, non-sterile, non-measuring, such as tongue depressors. The next level up is supplied sterile, such as hypodermic needles. We do have class 1 measuring, so a thermometer could be a class 1 measuring, such as the one that's popped up. That's a typical old-fashioned mercury capillary-based thermometer. But as we go up, the risk profile increases for class 2A. So a digital or infrared thermometers would be classified not as class 1 but class 2 because they're battery powered. They have a certain emission to detect the body temperature. So as we go up, the risk profile, the highest is class 3, heart valves, mass-produced joint replacement implants, and so on. There is in Australia a separate class called the active implantable medical devices, such as their implantable defibrillators. So if we look at these devices that are actually listed on the ARTG, manufacturers must be able to describe succinctly when information is revealed to the public what the intended purpose of that medical device is. What is the intervention that they're looking to address? And so for a simple device, class 1, non-sterile, non-measuring, the intended purpose is stated by the sponsor. So if you were to go and Google that and you click on that PDF that's at the bottom row of that table, public ARTG summary, you will see non-sterile, disposable, transparent face shield with headband for healthcare workers to protect against blood or other bodily fluid splashes while performing a clinical procedure. There are no other claims associated with this particular device. Similarly, as we move up the risk profile for a class 2 device, the thermometer that has the hand carried with a battery powered, supplied by a sponsor called Veritemp, again, if you go to that public ARTG summary, the intended purpose says handheld battery-powered measuring device for determining the patient's body temperature. It is used to estimate the temperature of a site on the skin, such as the axilla or forehead, by measurement of a body infrared emission at this particular point. So you can see that for class 2A, there is a power source, and it's measuring the body infrastructure emissions. Then we have a separate category in addition to class 1 to 3 in Australia called the active implantable medical devices. So these are operates on a source of electrical power. They're intended to be introduced wholly or partially into body during the procedure. They're intended to remain in place after the procedure. And active implantable medical devices are really a growing area, particularly in the sector called electroceuticals or bioelectric medicine. It's a really emerging field. A lot of these implantable medical devices come with a software that is embedded, but I will mention that if the software is a standalone software, that particular software would be considered as an active medical device, and we will talk about that later on. So an example of an active implantable medical device is such as the one being undertaken by a company. It's a company that was initially based in Sydney, and I have some familiarity with the Saluda Medicals, which is the company spun out of a research organization that I was part of. So I was part of NICTA, that is National ICT Australia. It is ARC funded research organization. And I was at that time director of health and life sciences in that particular organization. NICTA has now rolled into CSIRO as Data 61. But at that time, Saluda Medical was being incubated within NICTA. They were developing and evolving their technology. And now that they are so now they're entering the US market, and they have a device. It's a closed loop system to treat or manage chronic back pain. So their device is called Evoke. It's a spinal cord stimulator. It is classified as an investigative device. They are undertaking pre-market approval. It's a class 3 device. And they are at this point collecting a lot of clinical data on the safety profile and efficacy through clinical trial studies in order to get their product registered by TGA or the FDA itself. Now, Saluda Medicals has had a major win in the sense that last year they announced that they were successful in raising $75 million to undertake clinical studies. It was led by it's led by a consortium that includes Boston Scientific. So you can see it's an onerous and expensive pathway to get active implantable medical devices registered and approved by in-country regulators. So we've talked a little bit about Saluda trying to get their product certified and approved, and so they're a sponsor or a manufacturer, and they take full responsibility for undertaking pre-market assessment to classify their device. They need to assess it from a risk-based approach. They need to understand and be able to specify their intended purpose. And once that product is actually certified or approved, they need to continue to capture and document the use of that product, undertake post-market monitoring. And regulators now are requiring that manufacturers implement a quality management system, such as the ISO 13485. ISO is not referring to COVID-19 isolation. ISO stands for International Standards Organization. And increasingly, there's a requirement as part of regulatory reform that TGA will be inspecting these manufacturers and undertaking audits. Now, how do we have comfort that these devices are assessed and classified at the right classification? Well, the regulatory authorities have put in place a range of procedures and processes. They've provided a framework that all manufacturers must comply with the essential principles, and these principles relate to aspects of the device, including design and construction. And then the companies then need to undertake conformity assessment, which is really a systematic and ongoing examination of this, the evidence and processes that are in place that addresses these essential principles. So if you go on to the TGA website, you can download the checklist of how the companies should be complying with the essential principles. So there are 6 general essential principles. You can see 3 of them are to do with safety. So the first 2, use of medical device not to compromise health and safety. The design and construction conforms to safety principles. There's also long-term safety issues that must be addressed. The medical device must be suited for the intended purpose. You've seen examples of intended purposes that I've just explained. Medical device not to be adversely affected by transport or storage, and benefits of the medical device must outweigh the risk. So must outweigh any potential side effects. There are also 9 further essential principles that are to do with design and construction. Now, these 9 essential principles are really undertaken on a case-by-case basis, because some of these are not relevant to particular medical devices. So again, manufacturers must go down these 9 lists and be able to address the relevant ones. So let's talk about custom-made implants. These are implants that are really relevant to a lot of our colleagues here. Certainly in the ARC Summit, we are undertaking a range of research projects in partnership with our industry colleagues. So custom-made implants aren't listed on the ARTG. They aren't classified as class 1, 2, or 3. They're not classified as active implantables, medical device implantables. So what is a custom-made implant? Well, prescription lenses are classified as custom-made implants. Now, interestingly, if you look at the spectacle frame and you Google the ARTG website, it will come up with spectacle frame as class 1, non-sterile, non-measuring. But the lens itself is not listed on the ARTG. They're not classified as class 1 or 2 or 3. They are considered custom-made implants. So I have a prescription lens here. My prescription is specific to me, tailored to me. You can't take that prescription and apply it to another patient. That would be problematic. You could try, but that would be problematic for the other patient. The other type of custom-made implant includes 3D printed implants, such as a 3D printed titanium implant. At this point, I need to thank Associate Professor David Eklund. He's Deputy Director of ARC Summit. He's provided me with this image. David and Peter Lee were part of a team that developed this 3D printed titanium implant in partnership with an oral maxillofacial surgeon, Dr. George Dimitroulis. And subsequent to this development, it has been implanted in a patient. George then spun out a company called OMX Solutions, who is also a partner of ARC Summit. So custom-made implants, they're exempt from listing on the ARTG. How are they defined? They are made specifically in accordance with the request of a health professional, specifying its design characteristics and construction. So the health professional, in this case for the prescription lens, would be the optometrist. the health professional for this 3D printed titanium implant would be the oral maxillofacial surgeon. In this case, it was Dr. George Dimitroulis. It's also defined as intended to be used only in relation to a particular individual or by a healthcare professional to meet specific needs arising in the course of his or her practice. So why would a healthcare professional require custom-made implants? It's not just for the patient. Well, there are surgical guides that can also be 3D printed, specified by the surgeon and used by the surgeon. So this definition, again, must be included in the therapeutic goods regulation and in the Act. So other customized implants, dentures, patient-specific dentures, dental implants are included. The challenge for the regulators is, well, we've got prescription lenses and custom-made implants. A lot of companies take this particular route. They do not have to undergo the stringent requirements of manufacturers that list their device on the ARTG. So manufacturers of custom-made implants make use of this exemption pathway. They're not required to be assessed by third parties. All they need to do is advise TGA that they're supplying a particular kind of implant. They keep records. The records aren't audited. They notify the TGA of any adverse events, but the facility and the premise are not audited by a third party, such as not audited by TGA, none of the documentations. So very, I guess, laxed compared to the requirements of those manufacturers who list their products onto the ARTG. So personalized medical implant industry is a growing industry, and we are seeing increasingly more and more 3D printed devices coming onto the market. We're also now, industry partners that are investigating, looking at 3D point of care. Lots of reports talking about hospitals in the US being a manufacturer because they're having on-site 3D printing capabilities and doing printing on demand of medical implants. So here are examples of posts of Australia making gains in business of 3D printed body parts. CSIRO, who's one of our industry partners at ARC Summit, had been collaborating with Anatomics to create a world first 3D printed sternum. So lots of activity in the space. And it's a challenge for the regulators to look at refining and updating their regulations to do with custom-made implants. So there has been regulatory reform, and there has been an International Medical Device Regulators Forum, the IMDRF, comprising 10 jurisdictions. The jurisdictions are really countries that have come together. That includes Australia, Japan, Brazil, United States, EU, WHO is also involved. And they have all come together in the past few years to try and work out and nut out what is the terminology, trying to harmonize the terminology, harmonize the procedures and processes in place to ensure alignment of the requirements and to ensure that ultimately the devices such as 3D printed products are safe, that the benefits that outweigh their risks. So in December 2019, the therapeutics goods regulation were amended after significant consultation undertaken by the Therapeutics Goods Administration. So the TGA over the last 2 years has undertaken public consultation. They've interviewed, spoken to device manufacturers, spoken to the public, to patients, to hospitals, to healthcare professionals. All have been given the opportunity to identify their concerns, articulate what are the challenges that the companies might face if there were tightened regulations. So in the amendment, there are tighter definitions of what a personalized medical device is. So here it says it's a generic term to describe any types of medical device that are intended for a particular individual, which could be either custom-made, patient-matched, or adaptable medical device. So anything that is mass-produced, such as those, so companies like Johnson & Johnson does mass-produce medical implants. They are listed on the ARTG, but again, personalized medical devices such as custom-made, patient-matched, adaptable medical devices are not listed on the ARTG. So the amendment continues to specify that at a minimum, custom-made implants are intended for the sole use of a particular individual, could be a patient or a healthcare professional, must be made in accordance with written specification of the authorized professional. They take responsibility for the specific design, characteristics, and done in consultation with the manufacturer. And it has to address the specific anatomy, physiological feature, or pathological condition of the individual. So much tighter definition. So some of this I have captured from the TGA website. It's just a high-level overview. There are a whole range of other descriptors that come with it, but I just thought to highlight 3 of these descriptors to give you a sense of what the amendment has specified. So custom-made, one-off, so like my prescription lens, they're one-off. The 3D printed titanium jaw implant, that's one-off, that's printed on demand. The responsibility is on the healthcare professional. He or she, the surgeon, specifies the features, the dimensions, and the specs. The production, it may or may not be possible for the TGA or any of the in-country regulators to be able to validate or verify certain elements or design or production of a custom-made implant. So we look at then, so there's refinement. What is patient match? Well, now it's not one-off. We're looking at batches. So it's a small batch. There's no specification of what small or large volume means. It's just batch, but batching means that they're able to, if they were audited, the responsibility of the manufacturer is that they must be able to show that that batch is using, for example, the same manufacturing method for that particular batch, the same lot of the raw material that's being used to produce the final device itself. And there's more onus on the manufacturer to be able to validate, verify, and reproduce the device. And in a patient match context, it's based on a minimum maximum dimensions and a template within the constraints of the design envelope itself. So over time, a manufacturer may be able to collate a library of, let's say, jaw joints and have identified a template that specifies anatomical references, and they can use that as a template so that they can print on demand. So adaptable is considered mass-produced responsibility of the manufacturer. Again, onus on the manufacturer when they're being audited by the TGA to be able to validate, verify, and reproduce the information that is actually required. And the last column, non-adapted mass-produced, that doesn't come under personalized medical devices. So these regulatory changes, the reforms that are as a result of the amendment to the regulation, comes into effect on the 22nd of August, 2020. So these changes will result in manufacturers requiring to provide annual report, must allow the regulator, TGA, to inspect their production facilities, require lots of documentation for the manufacturer to show to the TGA when they are being audited, must require the manufacturers must provide information on each custom-made medical device that's intended for the patient, and the manufacturer must provide the patient with information on the custom-made implant itself. So there are transitional processes in place being put in by the regulator, and further guidelines will be introduced throughout the year. As part of the regulatory reforms, there are also significant device types that are being reclassified. That includes spinal implantable medical devices. These are actually upgraded to be from Class 2B to Class 3. What I'll highlight is that the active implantable medical devices that were previously classed AIMD, they're now classified as Class 3. So this is aligning with regulations and regulatory authority requirements in the EU, and aligning or harmonized with requirements in US FDA and in other regions as well. So there is also update on the regulations to do with software as a medical device. I'm just recognizing that time is running away from me, so I'm just going to very briefly mention that software as a medical device must again adhere to the definition in the Act on Medical Devices, so must address the ability to be able to diagnose. If they fall under these categories of being able to diagnose, prevent, monitor, treat, or alleviate a clinical condition, then they need to look for the manufacturers of software will need to get their software certified with the TGA or relevant regulatory approvals. So the SAMDs are required to be listed on the ARTG. Some of the regulatory changes means that for some devices, there may be a lower classification, particularly where a healthcare professional is involved, but in other instances, they may be upgraded. So some of the devices intended to provide therapy via provision of information will potentially be classed at a high level. So I'm going to talk about an Australian company called DorsalV. The founders are physiotherapists, and I first came across DorsalV many years ago when they were pitching at an investor forum, and at that time, their device was capturing data where they provide wearable sensors, and they were targeting initially the pitch to the sports sector. But over the years, the company has evolved and identified a really important sector which would benefit from the use of their device, and that's in the healthcare sector itself. So DorsalV has several components to their device, and we will look into what those components are. So DorsalV is based in Melbourne, but they entered the US market. And in order to enter the US market, they had to file an FDA 510K clearance, a pre-market notification. So the requirements of a pre-market notification is that they have 90 days to notify the regulator, the FDA, that they're going to market the device. And so they put out a post. This is captured on their website, that they have clearance to use this device. They've trademarked it as ViMove 2 to treat lower back pain, or to manage lower back pain, I should say, because they say it's a significant market in the US, with the condition costing more than 100-200 billion annually. So this was a post on July 2017. So let's take a closer look at what the iMove actually does. That's on their, this is on their DorsalV website. Latest in wearable technology, they have Bluetooth communication between sensors and mobile app, personalized clinician and patient apps, real-time access to data, interfacing with, as well as being able to capture smaller movements, EMG sensors, with faster startup and longer battery life. So already you can start, I'm hoping you can start seeing what class of device this product might might be. So the device has an accelerometer, a gyroscope to capture a whole range of different movements. And ultimately, the product has enhanced capability, allow clinicians to monitor patients outside the clinic, and so that these patients, the physiotherapist, can be able to tailor treatment programs for their respective patients. So these are the 5 components of iMove. They're sensors, disposable application pads, they have a recording feedback device, a rechargeable cradle, and the software package. Let's see how those components are actually registered on the FDA. So again, similar to the ARTG database, the public, such as myself, can go on to the FDA device listing database and search. So you can put in a search on the company name, as I did with Dorsal V, and this is what comes up. So Dorsal V lists all the different components on the FDA device database. Most of them are actually class 2 devices. The goniometer is a class 1 device. So you can click on these and it will take you into further information about these various components. So as part of their pre-market notification process, now I should qualify that pre-market notification applications are really, the 510 applications are really for class 1, class 2 device. For class 3 device, such as the one that Saluda Medicals is looking to get regulated on, they need to provide a pre-market approval process. That's more laborious, that's more expensive, because there's lots of clinical data and clinical safety data and effectiveness data that needs to be captured. So in this instance, for Dorsal V itself, they basically highlight that their device is similar to predicate devices. These are devices that are already legally supplied, approved by FDA. So 2 companies supply these, that is Insight Discovery and Vicon. And they basically highlight that their device is substantially equivalent to Insight Discovery and Vicon. So they actually list in the application, table that and look at all the features and functions of their device and compare it to Insight Discovery and Vicon. Ultimately, they said, we're substantially equivalent to Insight Discovery. Insight Discovery and us, our products are similar because they're non-invasive, multi-modality physiological monitoring devices. They provide real-time monitoring. They provide reports to the healthcare professionals. So there are many components that are features of their product that are similar to Insight Discovery. So included in their 510K application, they also list a range of standards that they have complied with, and it's important to be able to ensure that these standards they meet these standards. One that is mandatory is the quality management system, as I previously mentioned, the ISO 13485. So that gives you an overview of how onerous it is for medical device manufacturers to be able to document, to be able to produce high quality and safe products. So it's a great comfort to the public and assurance to the public that these processes are in place. There are conformity assessments that meet essential principle requirements. Now, I'm going to now touch briefly before we finish up on EU medical device regulation. So this will come into effect. It was supposed to come into effect in May this year. This replaces regulations that really have not been updated since the early 90s. The medical device regulators in the EU have recognized that they really do need to update and modernize their regulatory approach because they need to keep up with where technology is going. We've seen so much advancement in this whole area. But the challenge is that by updating their regulations, making it tighter and stricter to audit their facilities and making it more difficult from documentation perspective to show safety and effectiveness. It's a challenge for the pharmaceutical companies, for medtech companies, for the regulators and notified bodies. The challenge now is that it affects, this regulation also affects all legacy devices. There are more than 500,000 devices currently listed and approved, and they will need, the manufacturers of these devices will now need to show documentations of safety and clinical performance of their device. This is onerous. It's onerous on the notified bodies. They are the entities responsible for evaluating conformity assessments. It's onerous for the whole sector, and it's causing companies to review how they do business in the EU. One of the key challenges for a lot of companies and regulators is finding capacity and capability, sourcing them, because they'll need clinical and more technical experts to evaluate the conformity assessments that are be coming through from these medical device companies. So very challenging times ahead. Companies have been given many years of notice, but there has been a 1-year reprieve as a result of COVID-19. The date of when the regulation comes into effect has been postponed to next May. So that gives more time to notify bodies, commercial companies to actually get their act together. So at this point, I'd like to summarize by saying that it is important for the PhD students and postdocs working in partnership with our commercial partners to understand, as they work with the commercial partners, what their requirements are, understanding the class 1 to 3 medical device, understanding what are what is the requirements to conform and to address essential principles. We certainly have gone through and looked at some important regulatory reforms impacting the 3D printing sector, specifically to do with custom-made, patient-matched, and adapted medical devices. There are certain medical devices under this regulatory reform that have been reclassified, and that includes software as a service. At this point, I really thank you for your time and happy to take questions. I'd so like to acknowledge the ARC for supporting and funding the ARC Training Center for Medical Implants Technology. So thank you. So at this point, I'll take questions. Everyone's very quiet. Nothing on chat as well.
A question.
Yeah.
This is regarding engaging with the TGA and the FDA. Do you have any tips on that? And also, how do you identify what standards you should be abiding by? I know looking at other products probably gives you a good starting place, but is there anything else you should be looking at?
Yeah, so it's important that we start engaging, or medical device companies start engaging with the regulators like the TGA and FDA as early as possible as part of that regulatory strategy. So for a lot of the startups and entrepreneurs, if they're, for Saluda Medicals, for example, it's important that they, if they're looking at bringing that product to market, that they start that engagement as early as possible with the FDA to get their advice and seek their support and provide that strict guidance. So in terms of what standards are in place, well, that's important to work with the relevant industry partners because they are the manufacturers that will need to adhere to their quality management systems. in place. So it's really important that, and we have the luxury at ARC Summit to turn to a range of our partners to seek guidance on that.
Cool, thank you.
And Eric, I might also turn to you, and what are your thoughts on you know, some of the standards that you as a company, 3D Meditech, have had to adhere to in your 3D printed products that are commercially available?
Well, thanks, Jia-Yee. I think it's interesting. We've been tied into the evolution in regulatory advancement for some time now, playing an active role with the TGA and defining, you know, what, or at least giving active input to the changes in the personalized medical device regime updates. So we're 13485 registered, and we're very familiar with sort of what it takes to be compliant. So interestingly, in this COVID period, we were involved, and you've supported us very well in developing a couple of devices which were brought to the market in record time, nasal pharyngeal swabs and some other personal protection equipment. So, you know, we understood the rules, and we were able to sort of operate within the rules to get things done. And I think one of the things that this period has sort of shown is that there are a lot of folks from around the landscape, including from within the university, but other 3D printing companies, who, well, with all good intentions, brought devices to the market. And the regulators really had a hard time at the beginning trying to keep up with the onslaught of people who didn't know the rules and perhaps unintentionally started bringing things to the market that, while they thought they were doing the right thing, those people trying to do the right thing had actually failed to do the right thing. So it's been an eye opener for many, and it's good that you've put this on so that you can explain to, you know, various individuals and stakeholders across the university landscape that, you know, having a good idea is fantastic, but you need to think about the right pathways to bring that idea to market. Now, as a manufacturer and a sort of a private enterprise, we always want things to go more quickly, and so regulators, I think, are learning how to be more efficient and operate at speeds, especially in crisis, that they're unaccustomed to. So I think there's a benefit to everybody.
Yes, there are, and what we're seeing is that in the COVID space, that lots of people are coming on board, including universities making a lot of PPEs, for example. But increasingly, what colleagues don't realize is that making PPEs and supplying it to the in a clinical environment really requires registration as a Class 1 non-sterile, non-measuring device. And many are not aware of that, not aware of the technical documentations that they need to supply. So it's important for our PhD students and postdocs to be aware of this. And interestingly, when I was actually Googling on the ARTG database, I noticed that La Trobe University had actually registered themselves as a sponsor and manufacturer for producing face shields. So
Sure.
That's an interesting development for a university, because universities are really, it's not their core business to register themselves as manufacturers. And that's something that our PhD students need to be aware of. So at University of Melbourne, it's not something that we would do. We would license the technology to a manufacturer. So there are two routes: either you spin out a company or you license the technology. I do have a question from Majed Awaladala, who's asking, wondering if the modification for custom-made devices only apply to Australia and European markets. No, they apply. As I said, the International Harmonization Task Force is really coming to converge on terminology and procedures and processes in place. And these 10 jurisdictions includes US, UK, US, Canada, China, Japan, all of that. So yes, custom-made implants in China, for example, they will have their own respective requirements. And those that are, even countries that are not part of the EU, they will need to address some of these requirements.
Jia-Yee, I just want to thank everybody. Jia-Yee, this is a fantastic talk. In fact, the discussion and the questions probably point to we need to organize another seminar to address, just custom devices, right? So I just want to thank Jia-Yee and thanks everybody for coming on board. And we certainly, look forward to you joining us in our coming seminar. The next one we will certainly be happening, progressively for the next, couple of years. All right, thank you, everybody.
All right.
Thanks,
Thank you very much for your time, and look forward to seeing you at the next seminar, as Peter said. And have a good day, everyone.
All right.
Right. Bye-bye.